Ethan Drake had never felt his heart beat this fast. Standing in the grand hall of the Xyphoran diplomatic ship, he could feel the weight of every eye on him. Humans, aliens, dignitaries, and officers, all waiting to see what the human diplomat would do next. The hall was enormous, built of strange, shimmering metals that reflected the soft lights above in colors that seemed alive, moving like liquid fire. The Xyphorans themselves moved with a grace that seemed impossible for their towering, muscular frames. Their skin shimmered with subtle patterns, shifting like the surface of a calm lake disturbed by a sudden breeze. They were beautiful, terrifying, and completely alien, and at the center of it all stood Queen Zyra. She was taller than any human Ethan had ever seen, easily 3 meters in height. Her eyes glowed faintly in dim light, not because of some artificial device, but naturally. Her long, sinuous body moved with the perfect balance of elegance and power. Her presence alone commanded the room. And yet, as intimidating as she was, Ethan couldn't stop his mind from wandering. He had worked with diplomats, leaders, and negotiators all his life, but none had ever stirred something inside him like Zyra had. The banquet was in full swing, a mixture of Xyphoran customs and the minimal touches humans had been allowed to add. Alien delicacies were served, shimmering plates that shifted colors and textures as if alive. Humans had tried to adapt, trying the food, trying the rituals, all while being observed by alien eyes that didn't miss a single gesture. Ethan had done his best to remain calm, to keep his dignity, but every nerve in his body screamed that he was far out of his depth. He glanced at Zyra, who was conversing with a group of Xyphoran nobles. Her voice was a melodic mixture of tones, impossible for human ears to fully comprehend, but the universal translators did their job well enough. Humans were still learning the nuances of Xyphoran language, and every gesture and posture mattered more than words. Ethan noticed how subtly her body shifted whenever a noble spoke. She was always in control, always aware, always calculating. Then, in a moment that seemed to come from nowhere, something inside Ethan snapped. Months of diplomacy, of careful negotiation, of measured words, all seemed meaningless compared to the rush of boldness that surged through him. His mind was screaming one thought, and before he could even stop himself, the words escaped his lips. "I want to marry her," Ethan said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. The hall went silent. Every chatter stopped. The clinking of utensils on plates froze midair. Even the subtle, flowing patterns on the walls seemed to pause. Ethan's stomach dropped as the reality of what he had just said sank in. He hadn't even meant it as a political statement. He hadn't planned the words. He had simply spoken the truth, or what he thought was truth. Seconds later, the response came, and it hit harder than anything he had imagined. The voice was not soft, not polite, not negotiable. It was a booming declaration that echoed through the hall and seemed to rattle the very walls. "No." A few of the nobles whispered among themselves, their voices sharp and cold, almost dangerous. Ethan's face went pale. He opened his mouth to explain, to clarify, to apologize, but no words came. The translator built into his collar hummed quietly, trying to interpret the alien tones into something he could understand, but even it seemed overwhelmed. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of beings who could crush him without a thought. The Queen's guards shifted subtly, their long limbs and sharp claws glinting in the low light. Ethan realized with sudden clarity that he had made a mistake that could cost him far more than embarrassment. This was not a casual society, not a playful courtship. This was a civilization where words carried power and missteps could be lethal. Yet amid the fear, a spark of something else flickered in Ethan's chest. He wasn't about to cower. Humans were not physically strong compared to Xyphorans, but they were clever, adaptable, and bold when the moment demanded it. He straightened, trying to project calm he didn't feel. I meant no offense, Your Majesty," he said, bowing slightly. His voice trembled, but his eyes met hers, and he tried to convey sincerity. It was a human way of expressing admiration. Then she spoke, her voice softer, but still carrying the authority that silenced all others in the room. "Human audacity is interesting," she said, "but dangerous. Know your place, Ethan Drake." But despite the warning in her voice, Ethan noticed something else, curiosity. Zyra's eyes lingered on him longer than they should have. She wasn't angry in the way a Xyphoran usually was when insulted. She was intrigued. It didn't last long. A sharp tone from one of her nobles broke the moment. "Your Majesty, the human speaks as if he owns nothing but his foolish pride," the noble said, his voice cold like steel. "Is this the respect we demand from a delegate?" He realized that this was the moment that would define how the Zyphorans saw humans, not as weak or naive, but as a species capable of unexpected boldness. "I will handle this," Zyra finally said, her voice cutting through the hall like a blade. She turned her gaze back to Ethan. "For now, you will stay here. You will speak only when spoken to. Any further indiscretions will be met with consequences you cannot imagine." He watched Zyra interact with her nobles, seeing how every gesture and tone commanded attention and obedience. He realized that understanding this culture required more than intelligence. It required instinct, empathy, and the courage to act in ways the aliens would not expect. By the end of the evening, Ethan had learned something crucial. Humans were weak compared to Zyphorans in physical strength and natural defenses, but they had something equally potent: audacity, adaptability, and a willingness to act even when the risks seemed insurmountable. If he could survive this night, if he could navigate the dangerous waters of Zyphoran politics, he might not just survive. He might make a mark no one expected. As he was escorted back to the human delegation's quarters, Ethan's mind raced. He thought about the words he had spoken and the consequences they might bring. He thought about Zyra's glowing eyes and the faint trace of curiosity he had seen. And he thought about what it meant to be human in a universe that underestimated his species at every turn. He knew one thing for certain: the story of a human who dared to speak his heart to an alien queen had only just begun. And whether it led to disaster or triumph, humanity's place in the galaxy would never again be considered weak or insignificant. That night, Ethan lay awake, listening to the soft hum of the alien ship. He could still feel the echo of her word, the powerful no that had struck him like lightning. But he also felt something else, something harder to define. The faint stirrings of respect, the beginning of a bridge between species, and the undeniable fact that humans were not so easily broken. Tomorrow, he would begin learning Zyphoran ways, studying their culture, their customs, their language. He would prove that humans could be more than they appeared. And perhaps, just perhaps, he would find a way to turn audacity into an asset, a mistake into opportunity, and a single word of defiance into the first step toward understanding, and maybe even friendship with the most powerful alien he had ever met. Ethan did not know what the future held. He did not know if he would succeed or if his boldness would lead to ruin. But he did know this: humans did not back down. They adapted. They survived. And they found ways to shine in darkness that no one else could imagine. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the alien ship, Queen Zyra watched him, intrigued, aware that this human was unlike any creature she had ever encountered. She did not yet approve, and she did not yet trust him, but she could not ignore the audacity, the courage, and the strange, compelling energy that seemed to radiate from him. The galaxy was changing, and both human and Zyphoran would be caught in the currents of that change, whether they liked it or not. Ethan Drake woke to a quiet hum of machinery and the faint glow of Zyphoran lights spilling through the large window of the human delegation's quarters. Sleep had been fitful, haunted by images of Queen Zyra's glowing eyes and the single word that had changed everything: no. Even now, the echo of it lingered in his mind. He knew the consequences of his reckless proposal had not ended with the banquet. Every human aboard the ship was wary, and Ethan could feel the weight of their silent judgment pressing down on him. The first step of survival, he reminded himself, was understanding. He could not afford another mistake. He had glimpsed the depth of Zyphoran intelligence and precision, and he needed to adapt or face disaster. He dressed quickly, his mind already moving through strategies, then made his way to the main hall for the day's diplomatic session. The hall was empty except for Zyra and a small contingent of her advisors. She stood near a glowing table that projected a three-dimensional map of Zyphora's surface, her long fingers moving with practiced grace over the display. She noticed him immediately and tilted her head, eyes narrowing. There was no warmth in her gaze, yet no outright hostility either. It was a look of calculation. "Ethan Drake," she said, her voice precise and measured, "you are required to observe today. Speak only when instructed." He bowed slightly and positioned himself to watch the session unfold. The meeting was a lesson in alien politics and cultural nuance. Zyphoran delegates communicated with more than words. Small gestures, subtle postures, and even the shift of a limb could indicate support, dissent, or deception. Ethan watched closely, trying to decipher the hidden meanings behind each motion. One noble leaned slightly forward while keeping their arms folded, a subtle sign of challenge. Another's tail curled in a specific rhythm, signaling agreement, but only partially. Every detail mattered. Ethan realized he needed more than observation. He needed to understand the rules, the language of actions and intent before he could hope to navigate this world. He spent hours studying the delegates, mimicking their gestures in private, practicing the subtle ways of communication that went beyond words. During a break, Zyra approached him. Her glowing eyes examined him like a predator assessing prey. "You are persistent," she said. Her tone carried a mix of curiosity and warning. "You do not belong here, yet you attempt to adapt. Explain this audacity, human. Perhaps your species is more interesting than I anticipated, but audacity without understanding can be fatal." Ethan noticed that the rogue faction, the nobles who had frowned at his proposal the night before, watched him closely, as if waiting for him to stumble. Every misstep could be used against him. A single gesture misread could escalate into a diplomatic crisis. But he persisted, carefully observing, learning, and applying what he understood. He noted patterns, predicted reactions, and slowly began to anticipate outcomes before they happened. By mid-afternoon, Zyra summoned him again, leading him to a private chamber. The room was smaller, more personal, with walls that shimmered with soft bioluminescent patterns. Here, humans and Zyphorans could interact without the constant scrutiny of the public. "You wish to understand our ways," Zyra said, pacing slowly. "But understanding is more than observing gestures. It is feeling, predicting, and responding in ways appropriate to our society. You will spend the next several cycles learning our language of gesture, our patterns of speech, and the subtle signals that govern interaction. You will shadow our delegates, attend meetings, and observe. Mistakes will be noted, but I will allow no fatal errors. Do you understand?" He knew this was not a mere exercise in diplomacy. It was survival, reputation, and the first step in proving humanity's worth. The following days were grueling. Ethan shadowed delegates through complex negotiations, studied the flow of meetings, and practiced the intricate gestures that could signify agreement or disagreement. He struggled at first. Zyphoran postures seemed unnatural, their body language almost alien in its precision. But he persisted, knowing that each correct gesture and well-timed response built credibility. During one session, he observed a noble attempting to manipulate a voting outcome through subtle intimidation. Using his understanding of human psychology, Ethan predicted the noble's next moves and discreetly advised the Zyphoran delegate he was shadowing. The plan worked, earning a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval from Zyra. For the first time, he felt that humans could not only survive in this alien environment, they could influence it. At the same time, Ethan discovered more about Zyphoran culture than he had anticipated. Their society valued foresight, patience, and the subtle art of influence. Physical strength mattered far less than the ability to manipulate events, predict outcomes, and maintain social balance. He realized that humans, despite being physically weaker, shared similar strengths: creativity, intuition, and boldness when the situation demanded it. Zyra continued to observe him closely, occasionally testing him with questions designed to provoke error. One day, she presented a hypothetical scenario in which a neighboring alien faction threatened to disrupt the fragile peace. "What would you do, human?" she asked. Ethan thought carefully. "I would assess their intentions, find leverage, and attempt to negotiate a solution that minimizes conflict. If negotiation fails, I would adapt quickly, using available resources to protect those who depend on me while seeking a way to resolve the conflict without unnecessary loss." You describe human improvisation tempered with strategy. You are interesting. Where other species relied on predictable patterns, humans were unpredictable in ways that could become strengths. His audacity, once seen as a threat, now became an asset, but not everyone welcomed him. The rogue nobles, still suspicious, attempted subtle sabotage. They spread rumors questioning his competence, tried to corner him in meetings, and even attempted to manipulate delegates against him. Ethan countered with patience, observation, and occasional human ingenuity. He discovered ways to anticipate their moves, using logic, intuition, and diplomacy. Slowly, he began to gain respect, not only from Zyra but from those around him. One evening, as he walked back to the human quarters, he reflected on how much had changed. The audacity that had caused chaos at the banquet had evolved into cautious boldness. He had learned to read alien expressions, interpret subtle signals, and act with precision. Humans were still weaker physically, but they could think in ways that no Zyphoran had anticipated. He also realized that Zyra was not simply an obstacle. She was a teacher, testing him in ways that no human instructor could. Her no had not been the end of interaction. It had been the beginning of a lesson, a challenge, and an opportunity. That night, Ethan stayed up late, reviewing his observations and rehearsing gestures and responses. The hum of the alien ship was familiar now, almost comforting. He could anticipate the rhythms of life aboard the Xiphoran vessel, predict social interactions, and even begin to understand the subtle politics at play. By the end of the cycle, Ethan had made progress that surprised even him. He had learned enough to anticipate minor conflicts, advise Xiphoran delegates discreetly, and avoid pitfalls that could have led to disaster. He had survived the scrutiny, navigated dangerous social waters, and demonstrated that humans were not as fragile or naive as they appeared. And somewhere in the quiet of her quarters, Zyra observed him. She had not forgiven his audacity, nor had she welcomed it fully, but she could not ignore the spark she saw in him. Humans were unpredictable, bold, and audacious, but Ethan was also clever, observant, and adaptable. Perhaps, she considered, humans were more than their physical weakness. Perhaps they could be allies or even equals in ways that no other species could manage. Ethan Drake, exhausted but determined, knew the journey had only begun. He had survived the initial chaos of his proposal, learned the complex ways of an alien society, and started proving humanity's worth. The path ahead would be even more dangerous, filled with political intrigue, cultural challenges, and threats he could not yet imagine. But he was ready. Humans were survivors, thinkers, and bold enough to face challenges no other species would dare confront. As he drifted to sleep, the hum of the ship a steady, reassuring pulse, Ethan realized one simple truth. Audacity alone was not enough, but combined with learning, observation, and courage, humans could navigate worlds far beyond their strength. And for the first time since that fateful banquet, he felt something like hope. The galaxy was watching, and humanity had already begun to prove itself in ways no one, not even an alien queen, could ignore. The day began quietly, but Ethan Drake could feel the tension in the air. The rogue Xiphoran nobles had not forgotten his audacious proposal, or his growing skill in navigating their politics. They whispered among themselves, their sharp eyes watching him, their movements carefully measured to avoid direct confrontation but still meant to intimidate. Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before they made their next move. He entered the main hall with measured steps, keeping his back straight and his eyes alert. The delegates were already assembled, the room alive with subtle signals that humans often overlooked. Ethan had learned to see them now. A tilt of the head, a shift in posture, even the faint shimmer in a Xiphoran's skin could convey meaning. It was exhausting, but he had adapted. Humans were not fast or strong compared to Xiphorans, but they could think, plan, and improvise, and that was their advantage. The session began with a standard diplomatic discussion about trade routes and interplanetary regulations. At first, it seemed routine, but Ethan noticed something unsettling. One of the rogue nobles, Lithar, was trying to manipulate the voting patterns, subtly pushing other delegates to take sides against human interests. Ethan studied the interactions carefully, his mind racing. If he acted correctly, he could prevent the faction from gaining power without direct confrontation, a human way of turning strategy into survival. He leaned slightly toward the Xiphoran delegate he was shadowing and whispered advice, careful to maintain subtlety. The human translator device hummed softly, making sure no alien could detect his words. The delegate nodded, a slight but deliberate gesture, and began countering the rogue noble's influence with calm reasoning. Ethan's heart raced. Every move was a gamble, but it worked. The voting remained balanced, preventing the rogue faction from gaining ground. Queen Zyra, observing from her elevated position, tilted her head. Her glowing eyes were sharp, focused, and unmistakably calculating. Ethan felt a surge of satisfaction when he noticed the faint acknowledgement in her gaze. She was impressed, not because he had acted boldly, but because he had acted wisely, turning potential disaster into a quiet victory. By midday, tensions were rising. The rogue nobles, frustrated by their failure, began plotting a more direct move. They sought to exploit a minor misunderstanding between human and Xiphoran law, hoping to create an incident that would humiliate Ethan publicly. They set a trap in one of the private negotiation chambers, arranging a scenario where Ethan would appear to misunderstand a crucial protocol. Ethan entered the chamber, his senses alert. He could feel the subtle shift in the room, the careful positioning of the nobles, their tails flicking in synchronized patterns, a clear signal of collusion. but humans had a way of turning disadvantage into opportunity. He paused, studied the environment, and began applying logic, pattern recognition, and intuition, tools no Xyphoran could fully anticipate. The nobles presented a problem, a trade discrepancy that, if mishandled, could be seen as a deliberate insult to Xyphoran authority. Ethan examined the documents, the gestures, and the tone of the negotiators. Then, using a clever human trick, he proposed a solution that addressed the discrepancy while giving the impression that the Xyphorans had reached agreement among themselves. The nobles blinked, taken aback. Ethan's solution prevented a public scandal, protected human credibility, and subtly demonstrated human ingenuity. Zyra watched silently, her eyes glowing faintly brighter. She could not hide her recognition. Humans were unpredictable, audacious, and capable of clever improvisation. The rogue nobles could plot, but humans could adapt faster than they anticipated. Ethan's boldness, once a liability, was now an asset in a game of intelligence and strategy. The situation escalated later that day when a sudden communication arrived from the planetary capital. A rogue Xyphoran military unit, sympathetic to the rebellious nobles, had begun mobilizing near key trade ports. The threat was real. If they acted unchecked, it could ignite a conflict that humans were ill-prepared to handle physically. But Ethan understood something that the Xyphorans did not. Unpredictability could be a weapon. He proposed a plan to Zyra, using a combination of diversion, negotiation, and rapid deployment of human and loyal Xyphoran forces. It was risky, relying on timing, precision, and creativity rather than brute strength. Zyra considered him for a long moment, her glowing eyes studying his expression, then nodded. "You will lead the first stage," she said. "Human audacity is dangerous, but perhaps useful." Every decision was calculated, every move designed to maximize the advantage humans had, speed of thought, adaptability, and willingness to take risks others would not. The operation began at dusk. The human team, with loyal Xyphoran support, executed Ethan's plan flawlessly. They intercepted communications, redirected supply lines, and created the illusion of overwhelming force. The rogue unit hesitated, unsure of what they faced. Ethan's calculated audacity worked. Without firing a shot, they neutralized the threat, preventing a violent confrontation and preserving the fragile peace. Back in the command room, Zyra regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "You are clever," she said. "Your species survives in ways I did not anticipate." Ethan's actions had demonstrated that humans were not only audacious, but also capable of strategy that Xyphorans could not always predict. Whispers of respect spread among the delegates. Humans were no longer seen as naive guests. They were participants, contributors, and potential threats if ignored. Despite the victory, Ethan remained cautious. He knew the rogue faction would not give up easily. Their resentment was deep, and they were already plotting their next move. But for the first time, he felt a sense of belonging, a recognition that humans could stand alongside Xyphorans, not as subordinates, but as equals in intelligence and resolve. Zyra summoned him privately that night. The chamber was quiet, illuminated by soft, shifting light. She regarded him, her glowing eyes reflecting the patterns on the walls. "You have survived the first test," she said. "And not only survived, you have influenced outcomes in ways no human should have been capable of. This is impressive. I only wish to prove that humans are not to be underestimated." He had learned the hard way that courage and creativity must be tempered with observation, patience, and respect for alien customs. Humans could be bold, but they could also be clever in ways that Xyphorans did not expect. That combination could change outcomes in their favor. The next day brought a new challenge. A delegation from a neighboring planet arrived unexpectedly, threatening to disrupt the delicate balance of alliances. Their demands were aggressive, testing the patience and diplomacy of the Xyphorans. Ethan observed their actions, noting their weaknesses and inconsistencies. When given the opportunity, he subtly advised a Xyphoran delegate, helping to counter the outsider's influence. Once again, humans demonstrated that while they might lack physical strength, they excelled at adaptability, foresight, and unconventional problem-solving. Even the rogue nobles could not ignore his contributions. Though they grumbled in private, they began to recognize that Ethan Drake was no ordinary human. He was unpredictable, clever, and audacious in ways that Xyphorans struggled to anticipate. The Queen, observing all of this, allowed herself a faint, approving glance, acknowledging that this human had proven his value through action, not words. By the end of the cycle, Ethan realized he had changed. The fear and uncertainty he felt on the night of the banquet had transformed into confidence and focus. He had learned to navigate alien culture, anticipate threats, and act decisively under pressure. His boldness, once a liability, had become an asset. Humans were not the weakest species. They were unpredictable, resilient, and capable of feats that even Xiphorans could not fully anticipate. That evening, as he prepared for rest, he thought about the path ahead. The rogue faction remained a threat. Political intrigue and potential conflict were ever present. But Ethan was no longer just a human delegate caught in a foreign world. He had become a participant, a strategist, and a force to be reckoned with, even if the rest of the galaxy had yet to understand it. And somewhere within the quiet shadows of the ship, Queen Zyra observed him. She had not forgiven his audacity, nor had she fully accepted it, but she could not deny it. This human was remarkable. He was clever, adaptable, and unafraid of challenge. He had turned a reckless act into an opportunity, a potential disaster into a demonstration of skill. Perhaps, she considered, humans were a species to respect, or even fear in ways she had not yet imagined. Ethan drifted to sleep that night with a sense of purpose. The galaxy was vast, unpredictable, and dangerous, but humans had survived far worse. Courage, cleverness, and audacity had carried them this far, and would continue to do so. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the story of a human who dared to propose to an alien queen was far from over. He had survived the first wave of challenges. The rogue nobles had been outmaneuvered. The aliens had begun to take note. And most importantly, humanity had proven that its strength lay not in muscles or weapons, but in courage, intellect, and the audacity to act when others hesitated. The stage was set. The next challenge would be greater, the stakes higher, and the risks deadly. But Ethan Drake had learned that humans had one advantage no other species could match: the ability to think, adapt, and rise to the occasion when survival, and perhaps even destiny, demanded it. The next morning, the ship was alive with an unusual tension. Alarms were silent, but flashing indicators hinted at movement on the planetary surface below. Ethan Drake had barely begun his morning routines when Zyra's summons arrived. She was waiting in the central chamber, her glowing eyes sharper than ever. "You have learned our ways well," she said without preamble, "but knowledge alone will not protect you. Today, you will see the consequences of underestimating human audacity." The rogue nobles had been quiet since his last successful maneuver, but he suspected they were plotting something larger. "What is the situation, Your Majesty?" he asked, keeping his tone respectful yet calm. "A military unit loyal to the rogue faction has mobilized near critical trade routes. They intend to sabotage not only human operations, but also the stability of Xiphoran governance. If they succeed, war may erupt before anyone realizes what has happened," Zyra explained. Ethan's mind raced. The rogue faction had escalated from political manipulation to direct action. Humans were physically weaker than Xiphorans, but their advantage lay in ingenuity and unpredictability. This was the moment to prove it. He followed Zyra to the command center, a large circular room dominated by a holographic map of the planet below. Ethan studied the map carefully. The rogue unit was concentrated in 3 locations, preparing for simultaneous attacks. The operation required speed, strategy, and precise coordination. "Your proposal?" Zyra asked, folding her arms. Ethan took a deep breath. "We use deception and speed. We create the illusion of overwhelming force at each target. Human and loyal Xiphoran teams will be deployed in ways the enemy cannot anticipate. We rely on quick thinking, improvisation, and strategic positioning rather than brute strength." He paired humans with Xiphorans who had proven loyal during earlier missions. They reviewed the terrain, supply lines, and patrol patterns. Ethan devised decoy operations, placing holographic signals and false communications to confuse the rogue units. As night fell, the operation commenced. Ethan's small teams moved silently through the darkened terrain. He had carefully trained them to anticipate enemy moves, to use the environment to their advantage, and to think creatively under pressure. Each team communicated through subtle signals, blending human ingenuity with Xiphoran technology. The first decoy was deployed near the northern trade route. Holographic ships projected an illusion of a massive fleet, while small strike teams moved unseen around the periphery. The rogue unit approached cautiously, unsure of the threat. Within minutes, they had been lured away from their actual targets, giving loyal forces time to secure key positions. Ethan's heart raced. Every calculation mattered. One wrong step could trigger a violent confrontation. But humans had an advantage: flexibility. Unlike the rigidly trained Xiphorans, humans could adapt in real time, improvising when plans encountered unexpected obstacles. Ethan adjusted routes, redeployed teams, and used unconventional tactics to maintain the upper hand. The second unit, stationed near a critical energy hub, was prepared for confrontation. Ethan's team used a combination of human ingenuity and Xiphoran technology to create barriers that rerouted the enemy without direct engagement. They set traps that simulated attacks, forcing the rogue soldiers to retreat while causing minimal risk to civilians. The operation was precise, clever, and effective. Zyra monitored each step from the command center. Her glowing eyes followed the movements of every team, and for the first time she allowed herself a faint expression of approval. The humans were unpredictable, yes, but in a way that complemented Xiphoran efficiency. Their audacity had become a force multiplier. The third rogue unit was the most dangerous, positioned near the capital's administrative hub. Ethan devised a plan to split their attention, creating multiple points of apparent vulnerability. Loyal Xiphoran guards and human teams moved in synchronization, exploiting the enemy's hesitation. When the rogue unit attempted to advance, they encountered obstacles that seemed almost impossible to predict, forcing them into retreat. By the time the operation concluded, the rogue military unit had been neutralized. Not a single life from the loyal forces was lost, and the rebellion's plan had been foiled without open warfare. Ethan's audacity, combined with careful planning and human adaptability, had turned a potentially catastrophic situation into a clear victory. Zyra approached him after the operation. Her eyes glowed softly, reflecting the bioluminescent patterns of the chamber. "You have done more than survive," she said. "You have influenced outcomes that could have cost countless lives. You have demonstrated qualities your species should not possess. There is potential here, for understanding, for cooperation, and perhaps even for trust." Despite the success, Ethan knew the danger was far from over. The rogue nobles remained, plotting in the shadows. Their influence was subtle but persistent, and their resentment of human success was growing. Ethan also recognized that other alien factions, observing the humans' cleverness, might now see them as both valuable allies and potential threats. He spent the next cycle consolidating their victory, repairing trade disruptions, and ensuring that Xiphoran citizens saw humans as capable contributors rather than naive outsiders. He advised loyal delegates, coordinated minor logistical operations, and shared insights into human problem-solving techniques. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Humans were not only surviving but shaping outcomes through unconventional thinking. During this time, Zyra observed him closely. She tested him with hypothetical scenarios, minor provocations, and challenges designed to reveal weaknesses. Ethan faced each with a combination of caution, creativity, and honesty. He learned quickly that transparency could be as powerful as strategy. Showing confidence without arrogance gained him respect, even among skeptical Xiphorans. One evening, after another long cycle of operations, Ethan found himself walking through a quiet corridor. The ship was calm, bathed in a soft, shifting glow. He paused near a window, looking down at the planet below. Cities glimmered like stars on the surface, connected by trade routes and communication networks that pulsed with life. The scale of the civilization was staggering, and yet humans had made their mark here in ways he could scarcely have imagined. Zyra joined him silently, her presence commanding yet unobtrusive. "You understand now," she said after a moment. "Your species thrives because of unpredictability. You are fragile, yet you endure. You are limited, yet you innovate. This is fascinating." Audacity, creativity, and courage. These are traits that cannot be measured by physical power alone. You have proven that even a human can influence the course of a world if they understand how to act wisely. He had survived direct threat, outmaneuvered a military unit, and earned the respect of the alien queen, not by brute force but by ingenuity, courage, and calculated risk. Humans, he realized, were capable of far more than anyone, alien or human, had anticipated, but celebration was brief. The rogue nobles were still plotting, and their next move would not be subtle. Ethan knew that the next challenge might test every skill he had learned: diplomacy, strategy, improvisation, and the human capacity to endure in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet he also knew something else. Humanity had already proven that it could rise to meet challenges no one else would dare attempt. As Ethan returned to the human quarters, he thought about the journey so far. From the reckless proposal to surviving Zyphoran scrutiny, navigating complex politics, and outmaneuvering direct military threats, humans had already proven their worth. They were bold, clever, and adaptable, qualities that could not be denied. And somewhere in the quiet chambers of her ship, Zyra considered what she had witnessed. Ethan Drake had not only survived the trials set before him, he had exceeded expectations. She realized that humans were a species to watch, respect, and perhaps even fear if underestimated. Ethan lay awake that night, reflecting on what had happened. The galaxy was vast, unpredictable, and filled with dangers humans could scarcely imagine. Yet for the first time, he felt that humans had a place here, not as pawns, not as observers, but as active participants. The next cycle would bring new challenges, no doubt. But humans had proven that audacity, ingenuity, and courage were powerful tools. They could survive, adapt, and influence outcomes even when physically weaker. And Ethan, against all odds, had become a symbol of that truth. The rogue nobles would strike again. Other alien factions might attempt to exploit weaknesses, but humanity had already demonstrated its resilience. And as Ethan drifted to sleep, he understood one undeniable fact. The audacity that once seemed reckless had become humanity's greatest strength, and the galaxy had only just begun to recognize it. The morning light shimmered through the massive windows of the Zyphoran ship, painting the metallic walls with soft hues that seemed alive. Ethan Drake had spent countless hours planning, observing, and adapting since his audacious proposal. Each day had brought new challenges, but today felt different. There was a sense of finality in the air, a chance to prove, once and for all, that humans were more than weak, fragile creatures. Zyra summoned him to the command chamber. Her glowing eyes were steady, reflecting the soft lights around them. She did not speak at first, only observing him as he entered. Ethan met her gaze without flinching. He had learned to stay calm, to read signals, and to anticipate the smallest shifts in her posture. "You have performed well," Zyra said finally. "You have survived scrutiny, navigated political intrigue, and even a direct threat to the capital. Your species shows promise, but promise alone is not enough. You must demonstrate lasting value to our society." "I am ready to prove it further." Ethan's pulse quickened. This was the culmination of everything he had prepared for. This was the moment where audacity, intelligence, and human adaptability would be tested against overwhelming odds. He quickly gathered his team of human and loyal Zyphoran operatives. They moved with precision, following the plan Ethan had developed over weeks. It relied on diversion, misdirection, and unpredictability, tools that humans wielded better than anyone else. The first phase of the operation involved creating confusion among the rogue factions. Holographic projections of ships and communications were deployed at multiple locations, simulating reinforcements that did not exist. Enemy units hesitated, uncertain of what they faced. Ethan's team moved silently, taking advantage of every delay to reposition themselves strategically. At the central energy hub, Ethan deployed a human Zyphoran strike team to intercept rogue forces without engaging in open conflict. They used obstacles, barriers, and clever maneuvers to channel the enemy away from critical targets. Each action required timing, observation, and improvisation, qualities humans excelled at. Meanwhile, Ethan coordinated with loyal Zyphoran officials to secure the administrative centers. Messages were sent to key delegates, warning them of potential threats and arranging protective measures. Humans could not match Zyphorans in raw strength, but they could anticipate, adapt, and act with flexibility that no alien faction could predict. The rogue faction made a desperate attempt to breach the capital's security. Ethan acted quickly, analyzing the situation and directing teams to intercept them at multiple points. Using human ingenuity, he devised a plan to divide the enemy forces, forcing them into positions where they could be contained without excessive confrontation. The plan worked. One by one, the rogue units were neutralized. The combination of human unpredictability and Zyphoran efficiency overwhelmed them. No critical infrastructure was damaged, no innocent lives were lost, and the coordinated strike had failed entirely. In the aftermath, the city below was calm again. Citizens moved through streets that had moments before been tense and uncertain, unaware of the narrow escape they had experienced. Ethan and his team emerged from the operation fatigued but victorious. Humans had proven that even against superior strength, careful observation, rapid thinking, and courage could turn the tide of events. Zyra appeared beside him once the immediate danger had passed. She studied him in silence for several long moments. Finally, she spoke. "You have done more than survive. You have protected lives, maintained order, and influenced the outcome of events that could have led to disaster. Humans are capable of far more than I imagined. That is who we are." They could no longer threaten peace, and their schemes were exposed to loyal factions. Ethan had proven that humans could not only survive in alien society, but could actively shape outcomes through cleverness, daring, and decisive action. In the quiet that followed, Ethan reflected on the journey. From the moment he had blurted out his reckless proposal to the Queen, he had been tested repeatedly. Each challenge had required observation, adaptation, and audacity, the very qualities humans were often underestimated for. And now, humans had secured a place of respect in the eyes of one of the galaxy's most formidable species. Zyra studied him once more, her expression unreadable but softer than before. Audacity without skill is dangerous. You combined audacity with strategy, adaptability, and courage. Humans are intriguing. Perhaps one day your species will be more than visitors or diplomats. Perhaps humans will be partners, allies, or even something more. Time will tell. Their ability to act boldly, think creatively, and adapt to situations no other species could manage had proven decisive. He returned to the human delegation quarters, where his colleagues greeted him with relief and admiration. They had observed his leadership, ingenuity, and courage, and they now recognized that humans were capable of far more than Zyphorans, or even themselves, had imagined. That night, Ethan wandered through the ship's corridors, reflecting on the journey. The galaxy was vast, unpredictable, and often dangerous. Yet humans had proven their worth not through brute strength, but through courage, ingenuity, and adaptability. They had survived scrutiny, political intrigue, and even military threats, earning a place of respect in the eyes of one of the galaxy's most powerful leaders. As he looked out at the planetary surface, Ethan understood that this was only the beginning. The rogue nobles were gone, but other challenges awaited. Other alien civilizations would doubt humans, underestimate them, or attempt to exploit perceived weaknesses. But the audacity, creativity, and courage that had carried him this far would continue to serve humanity. In a quiet chamber, Zyra observed him from a distance. The Queen had seen countless beings in her long life, yet Ethan Drake had left a lasting impression. He had survived, adapted, and succeeded in a way few could. Humans were fragile, yet they were resilient. They were unpredictable, yet capable of brilliance. In their audacity, she saw potential she could not ignore. Ethan returned to his quarters and sat quietly, contemplating what had been achieved. Humans had earned respect, but more than that, they had demonstrated a fundamental truth. Audacity combined with skill, courage, and adaptability could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. The galaxy could underestimate humanity, but it could never ignore them. Weeks later, the human delegation prepared to depart from the Zyphoran ship. Trade agreements had been strengthened, political stability restored, and the rogue nobles were under observation to prevent future disruptions. Humans had proven their value, not as pawns, not as naive guests, but as active contributors who could shape outcomes. Ethan stood before Zyra one last time before leaving. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for the opportunity, the lessons, and for allowing humanity to prove itself. Show the galaxy what you are capable of." The galaxy stretched before him, vast and unpredictable, filled with dangers and wonders alike. But humans had already made their mark. They had turned limitations into strengths, fear into opportunity, and audacity into triumph. And Ethan Drake, who had dared to speak his heart to an alien queen, had become a symbol of what humanity could achieve when it refused to be underestimated. In that moment, he understood something deeply true. Humans did not need to be the strongest, the fastest, or the largest. They only needed to think, to adapt, and to act when it mattered most. In a universe that often dismissed them, humanity's greatest power lay not in their bodies, but in their minds and their courage. The story of a human who had dared to propose to the alien queen had reached its conclusion, for now. But the legacy of that audacity would resonate throughout the galaxy, a testament to the enduring, unpredictable, and unstoppable spirit of humanity. And somewhere on her throne, Zyra watched the stars, thinking of the human who had dared, survived, and triumphed, not through force, but through ingenuity, courage, and boldness. Perhaps, she mused, humanity had only just begun to show its true power.